They put her in handcuffs in front of the library, not in the dark, not in some back alley where rumors love to hide. Right there in daylight, beside a brick building with a cheerful banner that said Community Reading Week, while a few people paused mid-step and pretended not to see the part that mattered. A black retired teacher, 71 years old, a tote bag on her shoulder, a paperback sticking out the top, and a neighborhood safety patrol acting like they'd just caught a criminal. Her name was Mrs. Loretta Gaines, but almost nobody in town called her that. To most people, she was Ms. G, the woman who taught you how to write a proper paragraph, the woman who made you read out loud even when your voice shook, the woman who kept a jar of pencils on her desk and somehow always knew which kids needed a quiet second chance. Loretta had lived in the same area for decades. She'd seen the neighborhood change the way American neighborhoods change. Slowly, then all at once. New paint, new fences, new faces, then new rules, unwritten rules that didn't get posted anywhere but somehow everyone was expected to follow, especially her. She'd retired 5 years earlier. Her knees didn't love stairwells anymore. Her voice got tired faster, but her habits stayed. She still woke up early, still drank tea and checked the weather like she was planning recess, still walked to the library twice a week because she refused to let her mind go soft. That Tuesday, the air was crisp and bright. Leaves skittered across the sidewalk. Loretta wore a simple coat, comfortable shoes, and a scarf she'd owned for years. She walked past the community garden, nodded at a couple of neighbors, and cut through the small plaza in front of the library. That's when she noticed them. 3 people in matching navy jackets, clipboards, radios, a big patch that read Neighborhood Safety Patrol, not police, not security guards with a company name. Just residents who'd decided they were now the eyes of the street. They stood near the curb like they were waiting for someone, and when Loretta stepped closer, she saw it, the way their faces tightened. One of them, a white man in his late 50s with a shiny watch and the posture of someone who enjoyed telling people what to do, took a step into her path. "Ma'am," he said, voice polite in the way some voices are polite right before they become a problem. "Can I ask what you're doing here?" Loretta blinked once. "Going to the library." He smiled like she'd answered incorrectly. "This area is being monitored. We've had issues." "What issues?" Loretta asked. He glanced at his clipboard. "Suspicious activity. People who don't belong." There it was. The sentence that carries a whole history inside it. Loretta kept her voice steady. "I live 2 streets over." The man's eyes slid over her coat, her tote bag, her scarf, as if an older black woman couldn't possibly be local unless she had the correct paperwork. His partner, a white woman with a tight ponytail and a phone already angled like she was prepared to record, asked Loretta for her address. Loretta hesitated. Not because she was hiding anything, because she didn't like the feeling of being treated like a guest in her own neighborhood. "I'm not giving you my address," Loretta said calmly. "You're not law enforcement." The man's smile stiffened. "We're community volunteers. We're just trying to keep everyone safe." Loretta looked past him at the library doors, then back at his face. "Safe from what?" she asked. The man's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, if you refuse to cooperate, we may have to contact the police." Loretta felt something old rise in her chest. Not panic. Memory. She'd been teaching long enough to recognize the moment someone decides you're the problem because you won't perform obedience for them. I'm going to the library, she repeated, and stepped around him. That should have been the end. Instead, the ponytail woman lifted her phone and said loudly, as if she needed the plaza to hear it, "She's refusing to identify herself." Loretta turned her head. "I'm not required to identify myself to you." The man spoke into his radio, quick and satisfied. "We have a non-compliant individual, elderly female, refusing to provide information." Non-compliant. Loretta almost laughed. The word sounded ridiculous in this context, like they were describing a riot, not a woman with a tote bag. She pushed open the library door and went inside. The library smelled like paper and quiet. A young librarian smiled at her. Loretta returned the smile, relieved by the normalcy. She walked to the returns desk, slid her book into the slot, and reached for the new one she'd reserved. That's when the front doors opened behind her. Hard. 2 uniformed police officers stepped in. Real police. Weapons on their belts. The full weight of authority brought in by 3 people with clipboards and ego. The ponytail woman followed them in, pointing like Loretta was a runaway shopping cart. "That's her," she said. "That's the one." The librarian's face changed. Confusion first, then worry. One officer approached Loretta and asked her to step aside. Loretta did. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't make a scene. She had spent decades de-escalating other people's children. She knew how to keep her tone even. The officer asked for her ID. Loretta asked why. The officer said there had been a report of someone loitering and refusing to identify themselves. Loretta said she was not loitering. She was checking out a book. She said she was a resident and a retired teacher. She said she didn't have to provide information to a volunteer patrol. The officer's expression didn't soften. He asked again. Loretta took a breath. She reached into her tote bag, moved aside a paperback, and pulled out her wallet slowly, deliberately. She handed him her driver's license. The officer looked at it. The name, the address. For a second, the officer's posture changed slightly, like he realized this wasn't the person he'd been expecting. But the patrolman leaned in and said, "She refused outside. She was being hostile." Hostile. Loretta stared at him. "Hostile?" she repeated, softly, like a teacher repeating a word back to a child to show them how ridiculous it sounds. The ponytail woman said, "She made us feel unsafe." Loretta's shoulders lifted in a small, tired breath. "I'm 71, she said. "I'm holding a book." That should have been enough. It wasn't. The officer said Loretta would need to leave the property, that the library was not a place for disturbances. That if she wanted to file a complaint, she could do it later. Loretta felt the librarian watching, helpless. She felt a few patrons staring from behind shelves. Loretta said calmly that she was not causing a disturbance. She said she was checking out a book. The patrolman spoke quickly, like he was eager to win. "She's refusing lawful instructions." Loretta turned to the officer. "What lawful instruction?" she asked. "To leave a public library?" The officer's eyes hardened. "Ma'am, you're escalating." Loretta felt a bitter little thought flicker through her mind. Of course, if you ask for logic, they call it escalation. Loretta said she would leave after she checked out her book. The officer said no. He repeated the order to leave. Loretta paused, weighing her choices. She could walk out and let it stand. Let 3 volunteers set the rules of her neighborhood and her library. Or She could insist on being treated like a citizen. Loretta didn't shout. She simply said, "I'm not doing anything wrong." The officer reached for her arm. Loretta recoiled slightly, not to fight, but reflexively, the way any human being reacts to an unexpected grab. "Stop resisting," the officer snapped. And then it happened fast. Hands on her wrists, a twist, cold metal, handcuffs. The librarian gasped. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Loretta felt her face burn, not with fear, but with humiliation, the kind that takes root in your stomach and stays there. The patrol man stepped back, satisfied, like he'd just proven something. The ponytail woman kept filming. Loretta looked at the officer and said very quietly, "You're arresting me for going to the library." The officer didn't answer. He guided her toward the door. Outside, the air felt harsher. A few people stood frozen in the plaza. A child tugged at his mother's sleeve. The mother pulled him closer. Loretta walked carefully, handcuffed, while her tote bag hung awkwardly from her shoulder. At the curb, the officer asked her to sit on the edge of the patrol car. Loretta did. And that was the second humiliation, because the patrol car was parked directly in front of a sign announcing Community Reading Week. Loretta sat there like a warning sign. The volunteer patrol man stood nearby, arms crossed. The ponytail woman spoke to someone on her phone, her voice bright with excitement. Loretta closed her eyes for a moment and forced herself to breathe. She thought about her classroom, about the kids who came in hungry, about the ones who were brilliant but angry, about the ones who needed a teacher to look at them and see their future instead of their file. She had devoted her life to this community. Now, the community was watching her in handcuffs. At the station, the charge came out in bureaucratic language. Disorderly conduct. Failure to comply. Loretta stared at the paper and felt something like disbelief. She had not sworn. She had not threatened anyone. She had not touched anyone. She had not done anything except refuse to hand her address to a self-appointed patrol and then ask a police officer to explain why she had to leave a public building. But paperwork doesn't care about truth. Paperwork cares about the story it's told. Loretta's son, David, picked her up later that day. He didn't yell. He didn't demand. He just looked at her bruised wrists and said, "Mom, what happened?" Loretta told him quietly, in the car, the clipboards, the radio, the word noncompliant, the handcuffs. David's jaw tightened in a way that scared Loretta more than the arrest. Because David wasn't a kid anymore. He was a man who had learned what happens to black people when an accusation becomes official. David asked if there was video. Loretta said she didn't know. But the ponytail woman had been filming, and the library had cameras. The next morning, David did what his mother had taught him to do his whole life. He got organized. He called the library director. He requested the security footage. He asked for the incident report. He asked for the names of the volunteer patrol members. The director sounded uneasy, said she'd have to talk to the city. The city said they couldn't release footage without a court order. The volunteer patrol posted a statement in the neighborhood group. They said they had responded to a suspicious individual who refused to identify herself. They said the police had acted appropriately. They said they were proud of keeping the neighborhood safe. They did not say her name. They didn't have to. People in the comments did it for them. Some wrote supportive things. Some wrote the usual, "We don't know the full story." And then someone posted a photo from a yearbook, a classroom picture, a younger Loretta at the front of the room, smiling, surrounded by children. The caption said, "That's my teacher. That's Ms. G." That post moved faster than anything the patrol had posted. Because people weren't debating an anonymous, suspicious individual anymore. They were looking at a teacher, and the teacher had a history. Loretta didn't try to fight online. She didn't argue in comment sections. Her attorney told her not to. But something happened that the patrol didn't predict. The kids Loretta had taught grew up. They moved away. They built lives. They became nurses, truck drivers, accountants, soldiers, business owners, pastors, and yes, some became lawyers. And they still remembered her. They remembered the way she stayed after class, the way she bought books with her own money, the way she treated them like they were worth something. When word got out that Ms. G had been arrested, people started calling. Old students, former parents, people who hadn't spoken to each other in years. And they all said versions of the same thing. That doesn't sound like her, that doesn't sound possible. What did they do to Ms. G? The first court date was scheduled for a Thursday morning. Loretta expected a quiet room, the way minor cases usually are. A few bored attorneys. A judge flipping through papers. The prosecutor offering a plea deal just to move the docket. She arrived with David and her attorney. When they walked into the courthouse hallway, Loretta stopped. The corridor was full. Not a handful of people. A crowd. Men and women, some in work uniforms, some in church clothes, some holding coffee cups like they'd come straight from a night shift. People whispering, leaning against walls, looking toward the courtroom door. Loretta's eyes moved across faces, and she felt her throat tighten. She recognized them. Not all of them. Not immediately. Time changes faces. But then she saw a woman with a familiar smile, Tanya, who used to sit in the front row and ask 1,000 questions. She saw a tall man in a suit, Jerome, who had once been one bad day away from expulsion until Loretta made the principal listen. She saw a middle-aged man holding a folder, Mr. Diaz, a parent who used to volunteer in her classroom. They were here. For her. Someone in the crowd said softly, "Ms. G." Loretta blinked hard and forced herself to keep walking. Inside the courtroom, the seats filled. The volunteer patrol man walked in with his own little entourage and stopped when he saw the room. His confident posture faltered. Because there's a difference between accusing a stranger and accusing someone who has a community behind them. The prosecutor glanced at the audience, then at Loretta's file. The judge entered and looked out. His eyes paused on the crowd. Then he looked down at the case again, as if recalculating what kind of day this was going to be. Loretta sat straight, hands folded, silent. Her attorney stood when called. She didn't start with emotion. She started with facts. A retired teacher was stopped by a volunteer patrol. She was questioned without cause. She was reported as suspicious. She provided ID to police. She was in a public library. She was ordered to leave without a lawful basis. She was arrested after a reflexive flinch when grabbed. Then, the attorney asked for the body camera footage. The prosecutor shifted. Then, the attorney asked for the library security footage. The prosecutor cleared his throat. Then, the attorney asked if the court was aware that a neighborhood volunteer had been filming the encounter. The volunteer patrolman's face tightened. The judge leaned forward. The prosecutor said they had not yet obtained all footage. Loretta's attorney said calmly that the defense had filed requests and the city had been slow to produce. The judge's eyes narrowed. He asked the officer present in court whether there was body camera footage. The officer hesitated, then said, "Yes." The judge asked why it wasn't in the file. The prosecutor said they would need time. The judge looked out at the crowd again. Then he said something that shifted the air. He said he did not like cases where evidence existed, but conveniently hadn't been reviewed. He ordered the footage produced, and he continued the case. Not dismissed yet. But the tide had changed. Outside the courtroom, the crowd gathered around Loretta. People hugged her gently, as if she might break. People thanked her. People apologized for not being there that day. Loretta felt overwhelmed in a way she hadn't expected. She had always been the one doing the supporting. Now she was being held up. That weekend, the volunteer patrol tried damage control. They posted again, saying their intentions were good, saying they regretted any misunderstanding. But they still didn't apologize for the arrest, because apologizing would mean admitting the truth. Then the body camera footage was released to the attorneys, and it did exactly what video does. It ignored the volunteer patrol's story. It ignored the officer's report. It showed Loretta speaking calmly. It showed her handing over her ID. It showed her asking why she had to leave. It showed the officer grabbing her arm first. It showed her flinch. It showed the words, "Stop resisting," said like a trigger, not like a description. Then the library footage arrived. A wide-angle view of a quiet woman checking out a book while an angry narrative gathered around her. By the time the next court date arrived, the hallway outside the courtroom was even fuller. Not just old students now. Teachers from other schools, retired staff, parents, people holding signs outside that simply said, "Let her read." Inside, the prosecutor walked up to Loretta's attorney before the judge even entered. He spoke quietly. Then he handed over a paper. Dismissal. No contest, no admission, no apology. Just the case disappearing like it never should have existed. Loretta closed her eyes for a moment and breathed out. Her attorney asked the judge to note the dismissal on record and to remind the city of its obligation to preserve and produce footage promptly in cases involving arrest. The judge did. The volunteer patrolman left the courtroom fast, eyes down. Outside, cameras appeared. A local reporter asked Loretta how it felt. Loretta paused. She could have said a lot. She could have delivered a speech that would have made people clap. Instead, she said something simple. She said she'd spent her life teaching children to be responsible for their actions, and now she hoped adults could learn the same lesson. The city later announced a review of the Safety Patrol program. They quietly removed the patrol's authority to engage residents. They required training. They added oversight. And the library posted a new sign near the entrance. It read, "Public Library, open to all." Loretta kept going to the library. She didn't stop walking through her neighborhood. She didn't shrink. Because she understood something now that she wished she didn't have to learn so late in life. Sometimes, the only thing that protects you from a lie is a record. Sometimes, the only thing that makes a system behave is an audience. And sometimes, the best proof of who you are isn't the story they write about you. It's the people you helped, showing up when it matters. Loretta looked at that courtroom full of her former students and felt the strangest mix of sorrow and pride. She never wanted that kind of day, but she would never forget it. They tried to turn a retired teacher into a suspect, and instead, they reminded an entire town who she really was.